Hey guys, if you recently started following the podcast, welcome. If you're a returning listener, thanks so much for the support and hope you have been enjoying the episodes. This podcast is completely dedicated to exploring Alaskan peaks, no matter the elevation, and connecting with the climbers and mountaineers of all skill levels who challenge themselves to summit them. On this month's episodes, we sit down with Andrew Holman and Ali Cordes and discuss their individual journeys in summiting some local peaks within the popular Chugach mountain range. Andrew Holman, an experienced climber in the local area, never thought he'd be scaling epic peaks here in Alaska growing up in Florida. However, his passion for photography pushed him out of his comfort zone and now has an impressive mountain resume and is on track to completing the Chugach 120, where he has already bagged 100 peaks. I sit down with Andrew and discuss his route up Bellicose Peak and how the ever-changing Alaskan weather almost prevented him and his climbing partner from bagging the peak. We also chat with my wife, Ali, a casual climber and hiker, weekend warrior if you will, and how the physical and mental challenge of summiting Lazy Mountain in Palmer, Alaska, with a 6-year-old was well worth the long day as they were treated with some incredible views from the summit. You can find our episodes streamed on all major podcast streaming platforms. This is the Bagging Alaska Peaks podcast. Andrew, welcome to the Bagging Alaska Peaks podcast, man. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Good, man. I am super pumped to chat with you today for a few reasons. One, we're talking about Bellicose Peak today, which is a peak I'm not familiar with. I did a little bit of research yesterday and today, and it looks like a pretty epic peak. So I'm really excited to talk about that. Number two, we've talked a few obviously before this episode recording, and you've got quite the what I'll call mountain resume, if you will, man. A lot of peaks that you've done, specifically going towards the Chugach 120, which we'll probably get into here shortly throughout the episode too. So I'm really excited to talk about those few things, and of course just getting to know you, man, and how you started out mountaineering. So really excited to chat about that. So before we get started, what I like to do is just kind of provide a little bit of context, man, of how like you and I know each other, right? The first time you and I met was at the Mountaineering Club of Alaska's general membership meeting, right?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. So I think we've been communicating via social media a little bit here and there, and then we finally met because you are one of the board directors for the MCA. Which is really neat. Lane Christensen, right, on episode 2, he's one of the board directors, which you know as well. How long have you been doing the board director stuff, man? And what's your primary role with the MCA?
So I've been on the board for 2 years, and I think in October, kind of went for to get nominated again, and was nominated and won again. So I'm just starting like another 2-year term right now. And then, MCA I got involved, more or less because I was, to be frank, I was kind of a hater of the MCA in the beginning because I came from a mountaineering club, the Mazamas in Portland, and there was a lot of education and a lot of classes. And I ended up like helping teach a lot of those classes. And then I came up here kind of very stoked to kind of do a similar thing up here. And the structure of classes, wasn't quite as developed up here. And, people kept doing that management / gangster thing people do, right? Where they're like, well, why don't you do it? Why don't you help out? Why don't you help with the teaching? So I think that's kind of what got me involved in the board. As far as, the board, like the directors, the directors are kind of very generically defined roles, I would say. What I end up doing the most of, is stuff with video and photos and stuff like that. Like I shoot the meetings. We have a YouTube page where we post some of our speakers, the ones that I can be there for, and that sort of thing. So
yeah, nice. And so you said you're on for another year, correct?
I think it's another 2-year term.
Another 2 years? Okay, yeah. 2-year term. Yeah, nice. I think it's neat that. Right, when you have a volunteer program such as the MCA and you get people to volunteer for kind of leadership positions for the organization, I think it just shows their passion for the sport, right? And obviously the MCA, their primary goal, right, kind of the revolving around the mountaineering, skiing, hiking, all that stuff. So I think it's neat to see people throw themselves in those types of roles when it's completely volunteer based, which is really neat. And the MCA, as you mentioned, man, I mean, obviously it's continued to develop, but they've got some really exciting stuff coming soon. So yeah, again, talked with Lane too, man. He's been on the board of directors for a while too, and he mentioned some good stuff about you as well. If you guys want to hear a little bit more about the MCA or learn more about it or want to volunteer, don't worry, we got you covered. There'll be a kind of an MCA plug or commercial halfway through this, so you'll be able to get some more info. Well, nice, man. So talking about Bellicose Peak today, and before we get into the details of that particular peak, like the approaches and the routes for it, kind of want to learn a little more about you if you're willing to share that. So if you could, man, just take a few minutes and explaining where you're from, how you ended up in Alaska, and your relationship to mountaineering and climbing, how you got started.
Yeah, definitely. So I grew up in Florida, by just about every metric, the flattest state in the union. Like I've been to the highest point of Florida, and it's the lowest highest point. It's probably almost also the least prominent highest point because it just kind of looks like you're in a flat field kind of near the Alabama border, there's a little granite obelisk they erected there to mark it. But, I went to college up at University of Florida in Gainesville, and then, my first job, I moved to another flat-ish place, but for me, it wasn't flat compared to Florida, Oklahoma City. And, when I was up there, I was working at the Air Force Base, and I met a friend at a brewery. His name's Jeff. We're still really close friends, and we were really into beer, and I would go over to his house every week, and we would bring different kind of rare beers we could find, and we would sample them. We would always watch something. And what he always wanted to watch was this very cheesy reality show called Everest, about just people climbing Everest. And I mainly watched it because I just wanted to bond with Jeff and get closer to Jeff. And I was like, these people are crazy. I have no interest in not only do I have no interest in climbing Everest, I have no interest in climbing mountains. I don't understand why people climb mountains. I just didn't get it.
And here you are.
Yeah, and here I am. Yeah, right. And then so I ended up, when I was living in Oklahoma, I ended up taking like a 3-day weekend trip to Portland, Oregon, for beer reasons, because people kept saying like, oh, if you're into beer and you want to start a brewery, which I thought I might at the time, they're like, that's where you got to go. So I went there for 3 days and kind of fell in love with everything about the Pacific Northwest. And then long story short, I eventually ended up moving to Spokane, Washington, and Eastern Washington State, and, would take trips to the Cascades in Oregon and Washington and see all that stuff. And I was starting to also get really into photography. I had just bought like a fully manual camera, which back then those things cost, a fortune.
Yeah.
And I just kept wanting to get into more rarefied places. And I would see like these snow-capped, Cascade volcanoes and be like, I wonder what it's like to like shoot from up on those things. But I also was like, I don't want to die doing that. I don't want to become some statistic. Because in the Pacific Northwest, you're always hearing about the media loves to cover, the stories of someone dying on Rainier, someone dying on Hood.
Yep.
Those sorts of things always make the headlines, and they're always like what people are talking about at work. So in Spokane, I was going to take a mountaineering course with the Spokane Mountaineers, who are kind of a wing of the Mountaineers who kind of operate in Washington State. Then, through a weird string of events, kind of my job gave me the opportunity to relocate to Portland. And so then I ended up taking mountaineering classes with the Mazamas in Portland. And I really knew nothing about even hiking. Like I was literally Googling like how to choose hiking boots. Like I knew nothing growing up in Florida, I didn't know where to even start. But the Mazamas had a basic mountaineering course that they called BSEP, Basic Climbing Education Program. And it's like 6 weeks. You do like a weekend doing snow climbing stuff, a weekend doing rock climbing stuff, and then you do like a series of difficult, kind of conditioning hikes where they, take a rope with you and you do different knots, learn different things.
Oh, nice.
And, I was one of those people that I was just like in it just to learn the skills. I'm like, I want to take this class, learn the skills, climb Hood once, take some photos, and I'm done. And I don't want to bond with these people. I don't want to know anybody. I just want to learn the skills, right? And, it's in a very cliche, cheesy turn of events. It really ended up being like the community that was really what held me in there and kept me in there. A lot of my lifelong friends still to this day are people I met in that basic mountaineering course. I don't know what that would have been now, probably 15 years ago now. And so I ended up getting very involved with the Mazamas and started volunteering to help teach a lot of their classes. The book I learned, the Mazamas for their curriculum used the Freedom of the Hills, the book that's published by the Mountaineers. And the cover of the year I was like, man, I don't know what that mountain is, but I want to climb it. And I looked at the inside cover and it was in the Bugaboos in Canada. And so I was like one of those people that just wanted to tromp up mountains, but wasn't interested in rock climbing. And so I got into trad climbing to be able to climb in the bugaboos. And now that's probably my favorite style of climbing is like alpine rock climbing, like climbing easy, moderate trad routes in the mountains to get to the top of something. That's probably my favorite, type of climbing now, I would say.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Yeah, it's super cool to hear people's route and journey of how they got into climbing, right? Because it's different for everybody. And it's super interesting to hear your perspective and how you got into it, right? How you mentioned, I want nothing to do with mountains, but here you are today climbing, hitting 100 right out of the 120 of the Chugach peaks.
Yeah, back in May, I hit the 100th peak, my 100th peak in the Chugach 120, which was Beast Heaven. Not a super impressive peak, but just kind of can be a little annoying to get back into. But yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. And kind of going back a little bit too, it's funny how a lot of the places that you've been, such as Florida and Oklahoma, like I've been there myself. So I'm following your route, man. Like maybe I'll be at 100 soon. So that's interesting. So was it just from that course that you mentioned that really got you into the climbing piece that kind of motivated you to do it, other than the photography piece, right? Which we'll probably get into here shortly.
Yeah, I would say, with the photography piece, it's kind of, I feel like a lot of people have the opposite journey where getting into climbing gets them into photography, but it was really getting into photography is what got me into climbing, right? Because I wanted to get into just more rarefied places because I felt like I wasn't a good enough photographer to compete with everyone on just the same, pullouts in national parks. As far as the climbing piece, I took that basic class, and then the Mazamas kind of has a series of classes that teach you more skills. So they have like the basic mountaineering course, and then they have one called ICS, Intermediate Climbing School, and that one kind of goes for 9 months, on again, off again. And so you really bond with those people. And then after that, there's kind of like two almost parallel tracks where there's like there's a course called Advanced Rock, which is pretty much teaching you how to lead trad rock climbs. And then there's one called Advanced Snow and Ice, which is kind of like a steep snow ice climbing type thing. And those are probably the main 4 classes that they have. And so I took all those and then ended up like volunteering to help teach those
nice.
For other folks. Yeah.
Very cool. What was your first taste of like glacier travel, kind of getting towards into the mountaineering piece there?
That's a really good question. I would say it probably would be Rainier. In the Mazamas, you practice glacier travel on Mount Hood, but not really on a glaciated aspect of Mount Hood. But in my year after I took BSEP, I was trying to get into ICS. So like in the Mazamas, you have to kind of submit a resume to get into the next class. And so I was trying to like beef out my resume, and I thought if I had Mount Rainier on there, that would help me get into the next course. And I found some people that were willing to take me up there, and we went up the Emmons route. And I would say that was my first kind of real exposure on an actual glacier with glacier travel.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. Yeah, I'll be. I'm excited to do Rainier as well. My buddy and I will be doing it this year, kind of in preparation for 26 Denali Summit. But maybe I'll pick your brain on some of that stuff. Yeah, this is probably one of my favorite segments of talking to people during these episodes. Is this first portion of really getting to know like where they started, and with you starting right in Florida that has no mountains whatsoever, and then now you're in probably one of the more epic places, in my opinion, in the country to climb mountains, which is here in Alaska. So, thanks for sharing that, man, and super neat to hear that. Let's go ahead and get into the peak, man. Let's talk about Bellicose. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm really excited to learn more about this peak. Again, I did a little bit of research on it. But I'll let you more or less be the expert in talking about it. So before we get into like your actual summit, if you're able to talk to just Bellicose Peak in general, right, where it sits in particular, like what mountain range, maybe the elevation of it, and then we can start getting into the access of how you can actually get to the base of that mountain to summit it.
Yeah, I think, Lane kind of spoke to the arrangement of Chugach in his podcast, but more or less you've got the Chugach, which is one of the big, depending on who you ask, the big 5 or 6, or 7, whatever, mountain ranges of Alaska. Mm-hmm. And then the western half of that is Chugach State Park, which is, a little bit bigger than Grand Teton National Park as far as in scope.
Right.
And, Bellicose, I believe is the 3rd tallest peak in the Chugach 120 and maybe the 5th most prominent. and it's kind of the access to it is Eklutna Lake, which is the access to a lot of peaks. It can also be accessed from Ram Valley, which that has access issues right now, but that's another way that you can conceivably get in there. Or Peters Creek Trail is another way you can get up into that area. But yeah, it's one of those ones that depending on who you ask, I think it used to be bandied about as one of the more difficult ones, if not the most difficult one. I haven't done, the other one in the contending for that is Baleful, which I haven't done yet. But I think, Azrael Sellers was my climbing partner on this trip, and we were both surprised. It was quite a bit easier than we were expecting,
really?
Based on the beta and the trip reports we had read. I think that was probably a combination of us having good conditions and then also having just good information from other people who went up there with way less information,
Right. Yeah, I'm sure that's half the battle too, especially out here in a place such as Alaska, waiting on those weather windows and having good weather to summit the peaks. Yeah, some of the research I did, as you mentioned, right, the Chugach Range there, and man, when I was reading last night about Bellicose, I mean, there's like multiple approaches that you can get to the base of this thing, and of course, multiple routes to get to the peak of it. So, what route did you take in particular to get to, I guess, the base of Bellicose, and then what approach did you take to get to the base, and then what route did you take to summit?
Yeah, that's a really good question because you're right. There are just so many different ways to get up into it first, and then to go, to do the technical climbing. So we took what I think is, I don't know, I was about to say what I think is becoming the trade route for the approach, but I think that's actually not correct. I think another way is becoming the main way. But the way we took is the way most people climb benign, which I tell people now, I'm like, if you have a good weather window and you want to do the Chugach 120, I would do benign and Bellicose in the same trip because you can pretty much use the exact same camp. And getting to that camp is, are we allowed to cuss on this podcast?
Sure.
Getting to that camp is just a huge pain in the ass. I mean, it's horrible.
Really?
So the route to get to that camp is called Dead Goat Gully because it's this. So I guess kind of how you get there, you park at the Eklutna Lake, parking lot. You go down the same, kind of very easy gravel mountain bike trail for about 12-ish miles, almost to Serenity Falls Hut. And then, if you look over to where Serenity Falls itself is, you're wanting to place yourself above Serenity Falls to pass over the top of Serenity Falls. And so the easiest way to get up through there, it's really brushy. So the way people have settled on is there's this scree slope where just a bunch of rockfall has happened that broke through all the brush.
Yeah.
And it ends up leading to these sort of chimneys where you have to do minor stemming, and there's chalk stones like boulders jammed into the area, and it's just tough because it's a lot of scree and it's really steep. And what really makes it scary is it's just the rockfall is really bad in that area, and you have to either be right up on the ass of your climbing partner, or just you go for 15 minutes, you stop, you yell, they go for 15 minutes because the rockfall is just too bad. Someone could get hurt very easily.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And then once you get up there, then you're kind of just navigating this third to fourth class, scrambling in between hiking to just kind of make your way around up to this real nice grassy bench that's kind of above that whole area. And it's just amazing camping up there. The first time I was up there when I was climbing benign, we saw Wolverine up there and stuff. But really nice camping there. So that was our approach. I think the other approach people are using more now is called the Flatiron approach. And that is where it's a little bit more straightforward, but more mileage. And that's where you kind of get up onto the Eklutna Glacier, and then you kind of climb up back from there.
Okay. Yep.
And we, when we did it, we met some folks that were camping there as well, and that's how they got up there.
Nice. Yeah. As you're kind of going through some of this, I'm revisiting the image of the map in my mind that I looked at the other day of Bellicose, and man, there's actually quite a bit of glaciers up that way. I mean, you got Eklutna, you've got, I think I wrote down a few somewhere. Yeah, you got Shroud Glacier up there. You've got Wall Street Glacier. Are any of those, in your route that you had to travel across?
Yeah, so the route we used is a route that people call the Shroud. And there's also, there's a glacier closer to our camp that's just unnamed that, if you look on maps, it looks like it's bigger than the Shroud. A lot of these features weren't marked on maps. So another one of my nerd side hobbies is I like update map features on OpenStreetMap, this kind of open source mapping thing.
Yeah.
And then stuff like CalTopo and Gaia pulls from that and updates. And I actually had mislabeled that unnamed glacier as the Shroud. It rolled out the updates, and then I relabeled it. So now it should look right on CalTopo and Gaia. The Shroud should be marked where it is.
Okay.
But yeah, that's mainly the route we took. And so pretty much from camp, you kind of go up to like a pass, and then you're kind of looking down. You can see Rumble from there. Is the another big mountain in that area, and then you kind of start, picking your way up the ridge. And it's kind of one of those things where if it starts to get too hard where you feel like you're rock climbing, that's like the time where you drop down from that ridge onto the Shroud Glacier. And I think that ridge actually has been climbed in full by people that are bolder and or crazier than me many years ago, actually. But yeah, and the information we had read was people recommended to take 2 ropes and to actually leave one as a fixed line to get down off that ridge onto the Shroud, so that then you could get back out again easily.
Okay.
And so we did have 2 ropes on us to do that, but my climb partner for this, Azrael, is much faster than me. So like he was ahead of me. At this point, it was kind of a little bit foggy, and he was like, I think I found a way down, and it was like earlier than we were expecting. And I went down there and checked it out and like down climbed, and I was able to just down climb onto the glacier, and there's like actually really good rock, not even just for the Chugach, just really solid rock. And so I marked that. I think it's on my Peak Bagger track where that is. But I told Lane about it. He wasn't able to find it. And I told someone else about it, and they weren't able to find it. So maybe people think I'm sandbagging them, like it's not real, but we did. One of those ropes just stayed in our pack the entire time because we found a much easier way than most of the information that's out there to get down into the Shroud. Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I was doing some research yesterday, and again, 4 approaches. I'm showing the Ram Valley, which you mentioned, Eklutna Lakeside, which is the one that you guys did, or you could do, I guess, Peters Creek drainage, which is like 20 to 25 miles, which is insane. And then you can even start at Eagle River Nature Center, apparently, which would be a super long hike, I would imagine.
Yeah.
And then for the routes, so those are the 4 approaches, and then for the 4 routes, I'm showing like a northwest ridge, northeast face, Freers Cheers. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the east face, and of course South Ridge. So which one of those 4 approaches did you guys do again, or any of them?
I would have to look it up. It's
okay.
It is I forget. Yeah, I'm disoriented about the ridge like in my head right now. I would guess it'd be South Ridge. It's the ridge that you pretty much get off on and then do the Shroud. Most people just call it like the Shroud, the route, but it definitely starts on a ridge, and I think it would be facing, I don't know, maybe it'd be facing west. I would have to look on a map, but
okay. Yeah, no worries. But yeah, all in all, there's tons of approaches and routes that you can take to get there. So, something interesting that was brought up when Lane and I were talking recently, where it was, depending on what time of the season you climb a mountain, right? You can climb a mountain in obviously summertime and then do the same exact peak in winter, and it feels like a completely different summit, which I thought was really interesting that he said that. What time of the year did you say you did Bellicose again?
Yeah, so this would have been early June. So this was actually June 8th was the day that we summited. Yeah.
Okay. Have you thought about doing like a winter ascent at all for Bellicose and what that may look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be, it's funny. Oddly, it is a mountain that has been climbed in winter a decent amount because that Shroud Glacier gets filled in with snow enough that it's been skied quite a bit. Again, by people who are much bolder skiers than I will ever be. But because, that Peters Creek route that you talked, about, it's very long, but it's very flat. And so if that has snow on it, you could pretty much, ski that entire trail all the way to the base.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then you don't even have to fiddle with the ridge. You just go straight up the glacier from the start because all the crevasses and stuff are probably a lot more filled in.
Sure.
And then the descent, you can ski it. So I haven't personally thought about Bellicose in the winter because I'm not much of a skier. But yeah, some of these peaks I've definitely thought about trying to go back and do them in the winter for sure. Like, I guess, a friend of mine, a climbing partner of mine right now are talking about maybe this winter, like going up like the north face of Pioneer, which I've done that in the summer, but I haven't done that route yet. So
yeah, that's funny you said that. 'Cause, again, I know I keep going back to Lane. He was my last, obviously, episode, but We talked about that too. And my buddy John, the first episode, him and I did Pioneer Peak, and him and I were talking how epic it would be to do the North Face during winter.
Yeah.
Have you seen the recent show on YouTube? I can't remember, who was it? Cody? Was it Cody Townsend? Is that his last name? The dude who skied down it, right?
Yeah,
Which
I haven't
really
seen
cool.
that. I know who that guy is. I have not seen that video though.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. So yeah, check it out if you haven't yet. Yeah, so Bellicose Peak, a lot of different routes and stuff. So if you don't mind, let's transition to talking about like your specific summit day in particular, and kind of talking to the weather conditions that you guys had, and the overall trail / route conditions as well. So if folks that may want to get into doing that peak, they kind of know what to expect.
Yeah, so I would say it is commonly climbed in July. That's usually the best time. But it really, the bottleneck or crux of it is how good of condition the Shroud Glacier is in, because if it's in good condition, you probably don't even need to rope up. If it's in bad condition, you might have to like ice climb up and around crevasses and a bergschrund at the end. So we chose July. We didn't know what it was quite going to be like in there. This was in, I guess, 2023, and that year was actually kind of a bad year for Chugach climbing because the weather was bad all the time. But I had just started climbing with Azrael, who he'd be a great person to interview. Actually, he just completed the 120 this year, and so he was at 113 or something in 2013. So he was really stoked and fired up to go out even in bad weather. And my former climbing partner had just moved to Vermont. She actually, Abby Collins, she actually works for Alpinist and does their podcast.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So like I was missing climbing with her, and Azrael like saw a trip report of mine on Peak Bagger. And so the two of us started climbing together. We were just getting a lot of stuff done despite the forecast. And this one, I was like, the forecast might beat us, because pretty much, we ended up summing on the 8th, a Saturday, but we went in on the 7th, a Friday after work. And, we're riding our mountain bikes in the rain, and the forecast it was going to be like, chance of rain, but it was kind of raining the whole time. And then we got to the Dead Goat Gully. It kept raining. And then we kind of got up onto the bench, and it was just like a complete foggy, near whiteout conditions, where we're just getting soaked up there. And I don't know, we probably got to where you make your camp at, I don't know, like 2 a.m. or something like that. And, we both kind of made our tents, and then like it was hard to like construct our tents without getting everything soaked.
Yeah, I bet.
And then so like we kind of were like yelling at each other about, because at that point I'm like, man, we're going to camp up here, but I don't even know if we're going to climb this mountain, because if it's like this tomorrow, like I don't want to like climb this mountain in conditions like this, right?
Yeah.
And so he's like, oh, we're talking back and forth, and he's like, oh, well, let's set our alarms for 5, and then we'll see what it looks like. And so this is the summer, so at 5 there was already some light, and it was still the same at 5, and then we snoozed for an hour. It was still the same. We snoozed and this just went on and on and on. And I think we ended up finally the weather started to get pretty good around like 10:30 in the morning. And I think we were probably moving up there around 11. And at that point, yeah, it was starting to be like a pretty bluebird day. It was pretty nice.
Nice. Clear up for you, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's Alaska. I mean, you probably know more than I do. You've lived here longer, but that's the Alaska weather you get to deal with, right? Always waiting on that weather window. That one thing you mentioned, the mountain bikes getting out to the base there. I was going to ask how you guys did that, because you obviously started at the Eklutna Lake area, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you guys just rode your mountain bikes out there and then just ditched them, right?
Yeah. So I don't own one, so luckily Az is also very into mountain biking, so he let me borrow one of his. But yeah, that's pretty much what we did, because it's 12 miles, but not much gain to get to Dead Goat Gully. I think I looked it up. It's like 300 feet of gain or something like that. But it's just walking 12 miles with the overnight pack. It's just monotonous and just takes a lot of time. And so like I said, I think we probably started down there at 6 p.m. and got to camp at 2 a.m. So I don't know, maybe add another 4 hours or something if we were on foot, So it's just the most efficient way to get back into those climbs for the most part.
Yeah. So you guys rode your mountain bikes out there, set up camp, kind of waited for that weather window, then you guys pressed, right?
Yeah.
So what? So after that weather window, what happened from there? Kind of heading up to the summit there.
Yeah, so pretty much it's like there's like a very obvious pass where once you get to the top, it's not technical. It's, for all intents and purposes, kind of a walk up feature up just some scree. And you get to the top of there, and then you can kind of see everything. You can kind of see the lay of the land. You can see Rumble. You can see the Shroud. You can see Peter's Peak. That's another mountain in there that I haven't done yet. I haven't done Rumble or Peter's Peak, so I have like a lot of objectives in that area. So I'll definitely be going back there pretty soon, I think.
Yeah.
But and then pretty much there's just an obvious ridge, and you just kind of start climbing your way up it by the path of least resistance for the most part. It's just kind of like a series of, sharper and sharper gendarmes, big horn-like features on the ridge over and over again.
Nice.
And at that point, as we're going up those, of course, the clouds are starting to come back in again, and now we're starting to lose visibility again.
Yeah.
And that's when, Az found our secret little down climb route onto the Shroud. And so, yeah, from that ridge, we were able to down climb onto the Shroud, and then I made like a GPS waypoint of where that point was so we wouldn't forget about it, because, that stuff just looks completely different on the way out. And I guess that's some other thing I would caution people about is if they're researching Bellicose is I recorded a GPS track there. Usually I'm recording one with my watch and with my phone, but I only recorded one with my phone, and it was acting kind of buggy where it was only updating every time I looked at my phone.
Yeah.
So if you see my GPX track on Peakbagger, you can download it, but just use it as a rough guide. Like if you take that line that's on there, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah.
But anyways, so like the Shroud is just pretty much steep snow. It was more or less just steep snow when we were there. So I had, hybrid crampons, the kind that, attached to the back of a boot, but the front's just like a, kind of a pouch type shape.
Mm-hmm.
And Azrael didn't wear crampons the entire time because he's very confident on snow / a crazy person. He had them in his pack, but just never felt like he needed them.
Yeah, interesting.
So that tells you like how forgiving the snow conditions we had on the Shroud were, that he was able to do that. But more or less, you're just picking your way up this thing. There were so few crevasses that we chose not to rope up for that reason. And usually the really hairy part where sometimes people do rope up is there's a very prominent crack at the very top of the glacier, kind of right before you gain the ridge. And that thing can be what kind of turns people around or causes people to have to do weird stuff like, go off route and get onto some chossy rock to bypass it. So we got to that and it didn't look too bad at all. So we kind of just went far climbers right to go around it and just kind of kept going up. And so eventually you're back on the ridge again. So it's kind of like you're using the Shroud to like bypass the hard climbing section of ridge.
Right.
And then you regain it right before the summit pretty much.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask how much technical climbing there was, but it sounds like there wasn't much. Yeah? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, it's all like subjective, right? I would say like it's different people have different comfort levels. Like we were using ice axes, and I was using crampons and Az wasn't, but that section, in the conditions we had it in was not that bad. And then so, now we're back on the ridge proper, and that's for this section we did use the rope. We used, because we had two. We were always planning to use the rope on this final ridge climb. And for gear, like I brought some trad gear. I brought like a pink tri-cam. I brought a number 1 red, like a 1-inch cam from Black Diamond, and I brought maybe, I don't know, half a set of nuts. And then I brought a piton because the ice axe I had has a hammer on the back of it, not an adze. So
nice.
And I think a lot of people frown on pitons, but they're really useful in bad rock that nobody cares about.
Yeah.
Especially if you're not having to carry something specifically to hammer them in. If you already have an ice axe or an ice tool that has a hammer on it, it doesn't weigh that much and you could really get some protection where nothing else could go in.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But, having said all that, and then of course, as I'm sure you're going to hear this over and over again if you interview people that climb the Chugach, like a lot of big slings, because it ends up being that's usually the best you can do because the rock is just really bad. Like even if you have good cracks, it might. I mean, I placed a cam in a crack in the Chugach, and then the cam expands and breaks the crack open.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of folks talk about the Chugach rock and how nasty it can be for sure. It's interesting you mentioned pitons. I don't think a whole lot of people use those these days much, but they still sell them, I assume. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you can
Yeah.
still buy brand new pitons from Black
Good.
Diamond. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, I think the Mazamas, that's one of the few things they didn't really teach at all is pitons. That's something I just figured out by the place I learned to ice climb. We hired a guide in Banff, and he was talking about them, and he was talking about experimenting them and placing them and teaching us how to place them. And yeah, I think it's also kind of an American thing that they're maybe frowned upon, but like the best use for them really is like these for mountaineering, like mountain climbing mountains where there is bad rock, because you might be able to get like a little thin crack that you could pound something like that in, but nothing else will quite go in it.
Yep.
And the rock's so bad that no one is really going to care that you're defiling good rock. Now, if you start pounding in pitons at like a granite climbing crag on the side of the road, then you probably shouldn't do that, and people are going to justifiably be angry about that. But yeah, and they just weigh nothing. So they don't weigh very much. So it's like it's something I usually always have if I'm going somewhere where I feel like I might need to do an emergency rappel, or I might need some extra pro, and I'm gonna have an ice axe with a hammer anyway. I'll usually just bring one or two.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear that. Talking about pitons, yeah, again, something you don't hear a whole lot of people talk about. So it's cool that you.
Yeah, and they also have the benefit of they're so cheap that you won't cry if you have to leave one and rappel.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's a great point as well. Yeah, so that's the again, interesting that there's not a whole lot of technical climbing up there. Again, as you mentioned, right? It kind of just depends on the person and their definition of that, right? How long did it take you guys total, to hours or days, from start from Eklutna to get to the summit?
Yeah, so from starting at Eklutna, that was 12 miles, and that we probably left the parking lot, I don't know, at about 6:30 p.m. Probably got to camp at 2 a.m. And then the summit day, I think we left camp around 11 a.m. And I was just looking at the photos before I came over here, and so we were at the summit a little bit before 7:30 p.m. And then we were back at camp at around midnight, pretty much.
That's not that bad.
Yeah.
I figured it would be. I mean, I guess you could break it up as much as you want and as long as you want, but I expected it to be a little bit longer than that. But what about the descent or the climb down? How was that? I saw a picture. I think you have a picture on your social media about Bellicose and down climbing it, which was a pretty epic photo. How was coming down?
Yeah. So that gear, right? So like getting to the top, it was like, I don't know, maybe like 2 or 3 pitches of rock climbing. And I say pitches in air quotes. So like that section was technical, but I don't know. I would hesitate to grade it. I've heard it described as, I don't know, anything from 5.6 to 5.1. It was, I would just call it quote unquote low 5th class. Like I would say it's something that if you're a really, really good rock climber, you probably would feel comfortable not protecting it. But so we protected that. It protected okay. The rock was really bad, like in the Chugach. And I brewed a beer, an Imperial Stout for this climb called Bellicose. That's like 13% alcohol beer. So we both drank that on the summit. Yeah, it was amazing conditions up there. Like we could see everything. We could see Baleful, we could see Bashful, we could see Rumble. The hut that MCA has over there, Pichler's Perch, we could see that. We could see all the mountains you do from there. So yeah, it was an amazing summit day. And then going down, we kind of just reversed the route and really again pitched it out, like protected it, like down climb protected it more or less.
Right.
And then there's one section where we rappelled, and I guess it was faster than down climbing it, but it was just like a very awkward rappel where it's just like you're corkscrewing around a horn to rappel, so you're like you're trying to stay from bouncing all over the place, type of thing.
Yeah.
And the rope was there, the rock was really sharp too, so like I was definitely paying attention, when we coiled the rope back up again, of if it was getting shredded or damaged by any of that stuff, because that rock is just pretty bad. But after that rappel, then we pretty much just reversed the route, and as far as physical strain, it was a lot easier, but it just was more mental focus, right? Because you're just down climbing forever on this glacier, type of thing.
Yep.
But eventually it was like moderated enough that we could kind of plunge step and kind of start walking down to get back to the ridge. And then we got to the ridge, we didn't leave a rope there or anything like that, and it was definitely not necessary. It was pretty easy to get back up onto it.
Nice. So Bellicose Peak, man, it sounds like you could probably do that in a weekend, easy.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you have good conditions, right?
Yeah, so yeah, we were definitely able to do it in a weekend. And if you before I did it, again, I was just feeding off of Azrael's energy. Like if I didn't have a climbing partner like him, I probably would not have tried to do it in a 2-day weekend. That's one that in the back of my head I was reserving for a 3-day weekend or a Monday off of work type of climb. But I think because we went in on Friday and just plowed through until we got to camp and weren't satisfied with just camping at the base of Dead Goat Gully or something like that, a halfway stop, that I think that would have made it a lot longer.
Yeah.
Because then, we got back to camp at midnight, and then Sunday it was just easy. All we had to do was just go home, and it was a really nice sunny day. And
Nice.
As we were getting back to camp around midnight, that's when we saw some other folks camp there. And we were talking to Daniel Glatz, who, I don't know, he's another person working on the 2-Gauge 120. I think he's at like 113 or something like that. He was there. And this other guy, Brendan Lee, who is the person that really is one of the people that started to inspire me to start looking at doing the 2-Gauge 120. He was there as well. And it's only really the second time I had met him in person. So they were asking us for what conditions were like and what time they should wake up. And we're like, well, earlier than us, if you can help it. Because, we waited till 11 because the weather just wasn't there. But yeah, because they were going to go up the next day, and I think they started much earlier, and were able to go up the mountain and out all the way out in the same day. So
yeah. That's
but
awesome.
We had just the most leisurely day out. We didn't have to rush or anything. So
Sure. Yeah, that's cool, man. I mean, so many questions that I have in my mind right now I want to ask you. I'm trying not to like veer off course too much, but since you mentioned the 2-Gauge 120, I'll go ahead and talk about that real quick, and then we'll transition to something here shortly. But so the 2-Gauge 120, do you have to log that somewhere specific to I guess to say you did the 120, or is it just kind of integrity, if you will?
Yeah, I think it's more or less on the honor system. I mean, I log it on Peak Bagger just to help me stay organized, and so like for something like this, so I can remember the date that it happened, And unfortunately, my trip report for this trip was very short, but I also usually try to put a trip report in there so I can jog my memory about how the conditions were that time, if I want to do something else in that area at a later date, type of thing. But I don't think there is. I think and then MCA posted on their website. I don't think they have like a rigorous vetting process, but I feel like it's a small enough community up here that people just kind of know.
Yeah.
People kind of know if people have done it or not,
Sure. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And yeah, I think that's great that you can kind of do it off of that integrity piece too. But let's talk a little bit, man, about gear. I know you mentioned already some gear that you guys used while you were up there. However, if you could take a few minutes to focus on, if people want to do Bellicose, what is some gear that's absolutely vital in bringing with you to be successful on that peak?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll preface this with a disclaimer and saying that like a lot of times my gear selections are maybe not what other people should choose, but they work for me. But the most no-brainer thing, I mean, literally, is a helmet for multiple things. I mean, for the bike ride in, for Dead Gully, which just has really bad rock fall. And then, on that glacier, because, we didn't rope up on that glacier, but if we would have slipped, I mean, we would have gone for a ride. I mean, like you would have just cartwheeled a long, long, long time.
Yeah, sure.
And I guess that's something else that I should note is that another part of the decision of us not roping up is that, and the Mazamas kind of hammered this into my head, is like roping up on glaciers is great if they're flat. If there's like a lot of elevation gain and steep slopes and you're roped up, like if you're not placing protection into the mountain to secure that rope to the mountain, it's not really going to do you any good. It's more or less a death pact. Like you just can't self-arrest on a steep slope. Like if you're roped up with someone else and one of you falls, now you're both going to fall pretty much. Whereas if you're placing protection like a picket or something like that, then self-arrest can work because the picket can kind of take a lot of that energy. So that's one of the reasons we chose not to do that. But I guess backing up, helmet, super important. And then a lot of just the very basic, mountaineering 10 essentials, like, like sun protection, like for me, some way to get help without cell signal and What that is for you depends. For me, my setup is a little bit old school on that in a weird way, in that I have a PLB, so a personal locator beacon, which is, I always joke, it's like an oh shit button. It's like it has a battery in it that lasts for 5 years. You never have to worry about if it's charged or not. It doesn't have any subscription fee. You never have to worry about if you paid your monthly subscription or anything like that.
Oh, nice.
It's just you open it up, and you can use it one time, and it sends your GPS coordinates to search and rescue via satellite. So I have one of those that I always bring.
Yep.
And then I have like a newer iPhone that has the satellite rescue. I switched from Android to iPhone for that exact reason. But InReach is what other people bring. I think that's what Azrael had, is one of those. But so yeah, some way to get help without cell signal. For boots and stuff like that, I feel like that's a very personal choice. There's a lot of people that have done almost everything in the Chugach with trail runners. And for me, I just have a really, really prone to rolling right ankle, and so I just have to have something sturdy that's like a high top. So I use kind of just like a really lightweight 3/4 shank mountaineering boot that can take a crampon, with a heel bail but no toe bail. So that's kind of what I was wearing. I think Azrael was kind of in some trail runner-ish type stuff. Trying to think what else. So I have, for stuff like that where it's on a glacier, I like to have like a whippet and then like a smaller ice axe as a backup, because if it does get steep, it's just like it makes climbing even easier. And if it's not very steep at all, like it's awkward to hunch over to be able to use an ice axe, where if you have a whippet, it's just like having a trekking pole that can self-arrest poorly, but it can self-arrest.
Yeah.
Trying to think what else. We had lightweight harnesses to do that rope stuff at the top. We had a 60-meter rope, and at that point, it really doesn't matter which rope. Probably that's the lightest thing you can get, because you don't really need a thick rope or anything like that. Trying to think what else. And then like overnight gear, I just had like a very light tent. It's funny. Azrael and I's packing styles are completely opposite. So Azrael is a maximalist packer, and I try to cut weight, but then I end up taking like a bunch of photo equipment and beard to like make up for my ultralight aesthetic in the other direction. But like Azrael was so funny. The first time I climbed with him, we climbed West Kiliak, and it was like this heinous kind of bad bushwhacky approach. And then we get to camp, and he starts pulling out his gear, and it's like a clown car. He pulls out like a 3-person tent for himself. He pulls out a -20 for himself. The overnight low is 40.
Yeah.
He's like, I like a big tent. And then he pulls that out. I'm like, -40. He's like, I like to be warm. And he pulls out like a Bluetooth speaker that probably weighs 4 pounds. He has a bunch of he has like a jar of tomatoes.
Wow.
But
he's glamping.
Yeah, exactly. So that's how he rolls. But he's also much stronger than me. So he had a bunch of that stuff. But I had like a pretty fragile ultralight tent. And just, a 32-degree sleeping bag, which in the summer on the Chugach, you can usually get away with that. And it saves you a decent amount of weight over like a 20-degree and bulk too. Trying to think and then crampons. And so just crampons that can fit your boots. In my case, I used ones that I think they're the Petzls that a lot of people use for ice climbing. I'm drawing a blank on the name of them, but I like them because they're modular, because you can change out the toe bail to be automatic or semi-automatic, more or less.
I have the same. I think I have
links. That's what they're called.
Okay,
Petzl links. Yeah. Which those are complete overkill for that type of mountain, but it's just kind of what I had, and I don't know. I think that's more or less it. And then of course I always have like a charger that can charge my cell phone at like at least 30 watts, because it's like, again, because I've had search and rescue happenings in my life, I'm very cognizant about like having multiple ways to get saved and redundant systems on that. So and I think that's kind of underemphasized sometimes by people, but and then just the usual whatever food you can tolerate. In this case, I was going through a phase where I actually was liking dehydrated meals, so I had some dehydrated meals I liked.
Nice, yeah.
And there was a decent water source by camp, so we didn't really have to like carry a bunch of water.
Yeah, that's always good, because that definitely eliminates a lot of weight for sure. Yeah, speaking of meals, dehydrated meals, they can definitely be hit or miss for sure. You got to find the ones you like and kind of stick to them.
Exactly.
Any like highs and lows or like memorable moments on that particular summit that would be cool to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I think the low was just going in there in the rain and then being up on that bench, and it was just like we were literally in the clouds that were raining on us earlier. And it doesn't get that dark in Alaska in July, but like we were at the darkest point of the night is when we're trying to get to camp, and we're just rolling over all this bad scree when in on the light of day we saw that we were like above the grassy bench slightly, where if we would have just stepped down a little bit, it would have been much easier traveling.
Yeah.
That was kind of brutal. And the fact that in the morning it was still like that, I was like, I don't know if we're actually going to get up there.
Mm-hmm.
And then the good part, yeah, definitely the complete opposite. Definitely that the morning started out great, and then it got bad, and then it was just, incredible on the summit. It was just really sunny, and then even going down, the clouds started coming back in, but they started coming back in from the valley floor up. And so, one of my photos that won the MCA calendar contest this year is of Azrael going down the shroud with rumble in the background, and it's just like the summit massive of rumble because there's clouds kind of all on the valley floor.
Yeah.
So we got really good light and stuff on the way out too. So that was really nice. And then yeah, our leisurely day out, I was able to get some really cool photos of like the Eklutna Glacier and stuff like that. There's really good views of the Eklutna Glacier from that grassy bench up there.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, Eklutna Glacier is bigger than honestly I expected after looking at kind of the maps there and studying it a little bit more. It's a pretty massive glacier out there. So yeah, thanks for spending the time and talking about Bellicose Peak and kind of the route you guys took. That was super detailed and a lot of good data in there, and talking about the gear. Obviously, you mentioned it's going to be dependent on people's levels and stuff like that. But at least you threw out some good ideas of what you may want when climbing that. If you find yourself still hungry for more mountaineering stories and networking, consider checking out the Mountaineering Club of Alaska, or MCA for short. Founded in 1958, the MCA is a nonprofit organization that is focused on promoting mountaineering, hiking, climbing, skiing, and the preservation of the outdoors and wilderness. The MCA is also active in promoting conservation, trail maintenance, and vital in preserving some of the mountaineering history and place names within Alaska. Additionally, they are the primary organization that manages and maintains 8 backcountry huts available to the public. If you would like more information about joining the club and/or volunteering, visit the website at mtnclubak.org. So kind of, you mentioned it a little bit in part of this podcast, right? I like to talk about the physical, mental, and spiritual piece of mountaineering in general. Excuse me. So I want you, if you don't mind, maybe talk to one of those elements. It doesn't have to be all 3 of them, but maybe, the physical, mental, or spiritual piece of either mountaineering in general or Bellicose Peak in particular. So if you can speak to one of those.
Yeah, I think for me, what I like most about it is I have kind of a easily distracted mind, where I'm the type of person that is constantly getting 100 things 1% done and never feel like I'm really just grinding towards one thing with all my energies. Except in the mountains, I really do feel that way because it kind of forces a kind of like focus and a kind of mindfulness, because it's just like if you're up on that ridge, right, or you're up on the Shroud Glacier, it's like, to quote like a Nine Inch Nails song, it's like the way is through. Like you have to either like keep going or turn around. Like you just have to be in the moment. It forces you to really like focus and live in the moment, whether you want to or not.
Yeah.
Coupled with the fact that you usually don't have cell signal, right? So I think that's kind of what I really like about it so much.
Yeah, that's awesome. You mentioned mindfulness, right? And that's literally just being in the present, right? Which is fantastic. And I know when I climb too, man, like getting up there at the summit or even just climbing towards the summit, like every now and then you have to stop and just kind of take it all in, as you mentioned, right? Because sometimes you don't have cell service or whatever, so you don't have any distractions. You can just kind of breathe it all in which is I think part of the reason a lot of people kind of gravitate towards climbing, right? That's a big push for it, for sure. Yeah. So another thing that you mentioned too, I thought was really interesting, kind of going back to the mental piece, is the kind of the weather window in addition to climbing with other people, right? And I think that could really take a toll on the mental piece. For example, I've talked to folks that have done Denali, and there's a lot of mental game in climbing mountains, right? Specifically, waiting on a weather window, for example, are used, right? And waiting 2 weeks potentially for that weather to clear up to summit, like that really takes a toll on the mental piece, if you will. And a lot of people end up making that 180, turning around and going back because they can't deal with it anymore. So were there any specific moments that you kind of relied on that mental fitness, if you will, to kind of keep you going? I know you mentioned the weather a little bit.
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. You're going to get me on one of my soapboxes in climbing. I think the mental thing is so important. I think it's orders of magnitude more important than the physical thing, personally. Because for me, I'm not really a particularly fast hiker. I can't climb hard rock grades. I can't climb hard ice grades. You know what I mean? I just can I can just work through the suffering and not let it get to me. And that, to me, that is like the number one most important thing about getting up mountains. And that's the most important thing I look for in partners too, is that they can do that. And, and then when the partner component comes in, right, then it's really, you really have to have good communication with your partner, because that's a good way to not talk to someone ever again, because I always tell people, I'm like, it's okay to be scared or this, that, or the other, or maybe, I don't know, maybe you're having embarrassing stuff, like you're having bowel issues in a harness on a glacier, but you need to be comfortable enough with your climb partner to tell them all that stuff.
Oh yeah.
You can't just say, I don't want to do this. I mean, you can do that too. Don't get me wrong. If you don't feel safe, you don't feel safe. But, I think it's important to have a good, communication rapport with your partner.
Yep.
And, Azrael and I had gone through a couple climbs at this point. And so we were mostly on the same page of stuff on those things. I would say that, he's even better at suffering than I am, probably. But we both kind of, if stuff would get scary, we would talk about it if we needed to. Or I'm probably a little bit better at technical rock climbing than him. So I would always suss out something if we were gonna, we were gonna try to down climb something or something like that. And he would always be ahead, kind of scouting the route. But yeah, I think the mental toughness is so important. I think it's so much more important than anything physical. I mean, I think that's why, there's lots of people at your average rock gym that can climb better after climbing there for a couple months than I will ever be able to climb in my entire life,
Mm-hmm.
But to get out into the mountains and do stuff, very easy rock grades in the mountains, it takes all this other stuff, it takes all these levels of discomfort, and logistics. And really, there can be a lot of anxiety going up towards something that you think is going to be hard. That wasn't really pulling at me at Bellicose so much this time, but some of those big Cascade volcanoes, when I was going to do a new route that I thought was closer to the edge of my ability, I would feel sick to my stomach before I even got out of the car,
Yeah.
So I think being able to manage that and recognize that is so important.
Yeah. That's that's a great summary, really, of the mental piece. And I like how you touched on communication too, especially when climbing with partners. And something I've touched on really the first 2 episodes with a few folks is having that communication, that solid communication, as you mentioned, is absolutely vital when climbing with other people. Doing solo stuff, obviously, is a different story, which kind of throws me into another topic is solo climbing. Have you done solo climbing? Is that something you'd like to do or want to get into eventually?
Yeah, I actually do it a lot. But it's not, I don't know, it's not necessarily that I do it for some sort of commitment to purity of climbing or something like that. To me, I just end up doing it a lot because I just want to go be in the mountains, and I'm kind of a last minute person in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's maybe also why Azrael and I worked, is kind of he is too, where it was that Friday at noon, he was like, do you want to go to Bellicose this weekend? And that's kind of how I usually am. And for a lot of people that doesn't work, they have they have kids, they have dogs, they have commitments, they have things they have to be at. So, yeah, I would say, I'm sorry, what was the question again?
So going solo, if that's something that you're interested in doing, or which sounds like you've already done. So
yeah, so I've done a lot of stuff in the Chugach solo. Now, as far as when stuff starts getting technical, I definitely will shy away from that. If there's definitely crevassed glaciers that require roping up, I won't solo that stuff. Sometimes low 5th class stuff that I would solo anyway, that I would not protect even if I was with a climbing partner. There's definitely routes I've been on where I'm the more experienced person or the other person is looking at me for guidance, and I will protect stuff that I wouldn't protect if I was by myself,
Yeah.
And those things I will like climb them by myself without a rope. But I'm not like a super strong rock climber. So once it starts getting to fifth class, I'll still want to use a rope, and just the easiest way to do that is to have a partner for the most part,
Yeah, there's definitely different elements, right? As you kind of already mentioned, involved with both, right? Climbing with people and with not. And I do a lot of solo climbing as well out here. Again, nothing too technical, but I find it to be very pure when you're out there alone by yourself, right? Because you have nobody to rely on but yourself and your experience, which I find very attractive personally doing solo climb. So that's cool to hear from you. So as we start to close this up, man, I really just have two more questions. First one is what's next for you, man? Like, is there a certain peak? Obviously, you've got the Chugach 120 that you're trying to complete. But what's next for you, man? Like, you have your eyes set on.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I guess I'll give like a short term and a long term answer. So, I hit my 100th peak. Bees Heaven last, I guess it's still 2024 still here in a miracle of time. But, back in May, I climbed my 100th peak, Bees Heaven, and then, on that Aklutna mountain bike ride out, pretty much the same exact one that we took in Bellicose, I fell, fractured my left shoulder and dislocated it, and fractured my right wrist. And so I'm finally coming out of healing with that. Like, I have most of the motion almost back in my shoulder, and I should be able to get the brace off my wrist pretty soon. And so I guess short term, a friend of mine that's a videographer out of Sitka, he and I are probably going to climb the North Face of Pioneer this winter at some point. So that's one. And then a mountain that seems to be a kind of every other year thing that I do, Kings Mountain, which is kind of east of Palmer, kind of the most prominent triangle-shaped mountain that everybody drives by when they're driving out to the Matanuska Glacier. That's a really fun one, especially I would say for folks that maybe want to start getting more into like steep snow climbing, because it's more or less one long steep snow couloir for an entire 5,000 feet of gain.
Nice.
And you just have to wait for more or less the Matanuska River to freeze. So it's almost exclusively done in the winter for that reason, because getting across the Matanuska in the summer is pretty tough.
Yeah.
So those are probably my two short-term things that I want to do with him. And then, for the summer, I have 20 peaks left. And so I definitely have eyes on a couple of those. I would say the one I want the most is probably Baleful, which has a really difficult approach, and then some technical climbing on it. That's probably what most people consider the most difficult peak in the Chugach 120.
Okay.
I mainly want to do it because I don't want to be the guy that's at 119 and waiting for good weather conditions on Baleful for years. I want to just get the hard one out of the way.
Get it over with. Yeah.
But so that's what I would say is my summer 2025 thing I'm looking at.
Nice. Yeah. Very cool. Have you done Denali yet, or have
I haven't
any interest in doing that?
I am. Yeah. It's funny you say that. I've been in Alaska 10 years, and that's kind of the reason I moved up here is to do Denali. But kind of like you were saying, right? It really is the climbing partner issue is why I have not done it, because just from everything I've read and the people I've talked to that have done it, that's just so much more important than the technical ability.
Yep.
And I ended up in this weird middle ground where, my climbing friends from the Mazamas thought they were too good for the West Buttress, right? So they wanted to like right off the bat do a hard route in Denali. And then the folks I knew up here were like, eager beavers wanted to do Denali with me, but like the experience level was so low that I was like, I need someone with a little bit more experience, right?
Right.
So I think now I'm starting to come into people that have just about similar levels of experience, and I know I can communicate with them and tolerate them, and they could probably tolerate me in bad, grumpy, conditions. So I think I was actually planning on doing that in 25 until this injury happened. So that's probably going to be a 26 for me as well.
Nice. Well, maybe we'll see you up there, man. Yeah. So I've got, as I kind of alluded to earlier, team and I, we're going to train all of 2025, make sure we got our stuff together, then push in 26. So a little bit far out, but we wanted to take our time kind of training and, establishing some relationships. So
yeah, smart.
Yeah, man, that's cool to hear. Your hopes for Denali. I talked to a lot of people too, and I've heard a lot of folks move here in particular for Denali, which is interesting to hear. So last thing I want to end with, and I've ended with this the last few episodes. Is there do you have a favorite mountaineering quote or saying that you want to end with that you kind of go to maybe periodically?
Yeah, so I listened to your past two podcasts, and there were some good quotes, and then nothing really initially came to mind when I was thinking about this question. But then not really a mountaineering saying, but there is a saying that I associate a lot with mountaineering and climbing, and it probably people say this about lots of different hobbies. This saying, I don't know who the original source of this is, but it's something like climbers don't like climbing; they just like having climbed.
Okay.
And I feel like that's me because I do feel like, when folks that aren't climbers, like my mom will say, I'll describe something and talk about how hard it was and how cold I was and how much suffering there was and all this stuff. And then I couldn't wait to get back in town and eat some pizza at Moose's Tooth. She's like, well, then why did you do it then? If it was like, it sounds horrible. And to me, it is how good it feels to not be there anymore. It really is. A quote of mine is it's very cliche, but I always tell people, like, life is about the contrast, right? It's like the mountains the mountains make the mundane feel good, and the mundane makes you kind of long for the mountains, right? And it's like a cold plunge and then rolling around, or a hot plunge and then running around in the snow and then getting back in the hot tub type feeling, right?
Yeah,
It's like those two complement the other, and I think there's this feeling that I disagree with in the mountaineering, in the outdoor community, where people are kind of like very much negative about society or urban areas or all this sort of thing, right? Like when I first started climbing Mount Hood, I would be up there, and you'd reach a certain point on Mount Hood where you'd be able to Mount Hood. You always have to start it for safety reasons really early in the morning. So you'd be starting climb at midnight or 1 a.m., right? And so you'd reach this point on the mountain where you could look out and see the city lights of Portland. And there's always some version of a joke of like, oh, look at all those, poor bastards down there getting drunk, and we're up here. And there's always some sort of dialogue of that. And I'm just like, you can have both, though. Like, you can be the person that gets drunk in downtown Portland and the person that climbs Mount Hood, and doing one kind of complements the other one.
Yeah.
I don't think it has to be really an either or. I think there's like a middle path, And so for me, yeah, I guess that's what I like about mountains. I feel like it makes my mundane, seemingly boring life, it makes me be able to enjoy the comforts better. And then also, when I start getting too comfortable, it makes me want to go back up there,
Yeah, I love that, man. That's a sick answer. And you say life is a contrast or something.
Well,
like
life's about contrast.
Life's about contrast.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
I love that, man.
Because if things are always good or always bad, right, it's just not interesting. It's not. It's boring in different avenues.
Yeah, man. That's yeah, I love that, man, and great way to end this episode, man, and kind of close it out. Yeah, Andrew, man, I want to thank you for taking the time and really everyone that's done it so far and the folks that'll come on, man. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to come and chat about mountains, man, and have a cold beer. So appreciate your time, and hopefully here in the near future we can head out and summit some peaks, man.
Yeah, definitely. This was really fun. Glad I did this.
Yeah, sick, man. Thanks, buddy.
Yeah, no problem.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please take a few minutes to like, subscribe, drop a comment, or leave a rating on whatever platform you are using to support the podcast and to reach more current and aspiring mountaineers. As a reminder, if you would like to connect with other climbers, hikers, and mountaineers, consider joining the Mountaineering Club of Alaska at mtnclubak.org. Although mountaineering can sometimes be an individual journey and challenge in itself, there's also something very profound about talking and sharing those experiences with those alike. That's exactly why I started this podcast, to simply connect. This podcast has been produced by myself, and original music has been provided by Emberloom. I am your host, Sean Cordes. Thanks for listening, and safe climbing.